morning. Well, that was weak. Let's try one more time. Good morning. Good morning. All right. It's good to see you. Glad to have everybody back after Christmas break. Is it okay to call it Christmas break? All right. If Ball State doesn't, we still will. Okay. I hope you had a good, restful break and have come back to campus renewed, ready to tackle classes and life. Right? Okay, so we start a new series of messages for the spring semester. We're going to be in the Psalms. There are 150 Psalms. We are not going to cover all of them, okay, between now and the end of April. But we're going to hit a selected few. And the Psalms are an interesting part of the Old Testament in that between the Psalms and Isaiah, probably the two sections of the Old Testament most quoted by New Testament authors. And so one of the things we're going to pay attention to as we go through some of these Psalms is how they are used by the New Testament authors. So to give you a preview for next Sunday, so that means you have to come back, right? Psalm 2 is quoted in 3 or 4 places in the New Testament. That's all I'm going to say. So for you to know how that's done, you have to come back. Unless you're going to go, which is okay. If you're going to go to Psalm 2 and find a good reference Bible and see how those references lead you to those places in the New Testament, I'll be happy if I hear that you've done that. So I won't complain too much. All right? But Psalm 2 is one of those, and there are some others. Psalm 110, Psalm 69, and a few others. Today, though, we're going to start with Psalm 1. It's Psalm 1 for a reason. Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 are put at the beginning of the collection of Psalms to introduce some key themes that are addressed through the rest of the Psalms. Okay? One of the things, and I've mentioned this a couple times when we were going through Isaiah last semester, to remember that in Isaiah, we were reading through some sections that had narrative and story, but a large part of Isaiah was written in poetic form. Excuse me. That's even more so the case with the Psalms. The Psalms are essentially a collection of poems. And I have to confess that when I was your age, I was not big into poetry. And you might pray for my wife. You know, she did not get a poem-writing husband. Okay? There's a movie out called The Green Book. Anybody heard about this movie? The Green Book. Any seen it or heard? So this guy who's a boxer, Italian, in the Bronx, okay? Rough guy. Works for security in nightclubs. He's married, okay? He gets a job as a driver in security for a band leader who's black, who's going to go on a tour, and part of that tour is going through the South. So this is 1962, and so this Italian driver is supposed to drive this guy through the South and get him everywhere he's supposed to go on time and bring him back safely. Okay? That's why he's hired. So that's what kind of guy he is. He's rough, and you don't mess with him. Okay? So, his wife requests, please write a few letters. Would you write me a few letters while you're gone? It's going to be 8 weeks. He's going to be out on the road, driving this guy around, and his wife is going to miss him. Okay? But doesn't that just warm your heart? This wife wants letters from her husband, traveling, potentially in some dangerous places. Just think about, some bars in the South, rednecks who not too sure about how this guy is in their city. There were some incidents. Okay, this movie, it's a good movie to see. All right, and so he's writing these letters. The guy, Don Shirley, who is the band leader, is a well-educated, very literate man, And he says, what are you doing? And he says, writing a letter to my wife. And I can't even come close to the Italian rough street speech of Tony. So he shows him the letter, and basically Don Shirley says, you need help. Okay? So he helps him write his letters. And then there's a couple other scenes where the wife is getting the letter, and she's reading them to her sister, and there's tears, and, and she's going, she doesn't say it, but she's going, all right, he's got to be getting help. Okay? I did ask my husband to write letters, but he didn't write letters like this. Okay? And so at the end of the movie, they come home. Don Shirley, the band leader, visits their home at Christmas time. The wife gives Don Shirley a hug and says, thank you for the letters. Thank you for the help with the letters. And he smiles. Anyway, that's free. That's extra. It's not in my sermon notes. Okay? Now, but I do say all that to say this. There are some things we can say through poetry that you can't say any other way. Okay? Some truth, some meaning, hope that comes to us through poetic forms that we can't come to any other way. My preferred reading is just straight, I shouldn't say straight, history and narrative. I took a while to warm up to even fiction, just reading fiction, okay? Yeah, I know. I was an impoverished youth, but I'm doing better now. Still not too good at poetry, okay? I don't read poetry very well. I do have some in my office, but I'm not good at reading it. But I have come to value the poems in the poetry of the Bible, particularly the Psalms, okay? When the Psalms are using poetry, they're trying to help us understand and see a reality that is much greater than we can express in any other form of speech. Okay? So in the Bible, you'll find things like story, you'll find things like law codes, history, parables, other things. There's a variety of language used. And so, girls, if your significant other cannot say anything to you more than, so if he says to you, I told you I loved you 20 years ago. If things change, I will let you know, right? He needs help, okay? All right? He needs to be able to say, I love you, and maybe even do things. He can't write or recite poetry, do things that speak your love language, okay? So my wife is doing the dishes, all right? Running the vacuum cleaner, folding the laundry, helping her around the house, giving her a day off. I take care of the kids, okay? So my goal in all of that is to make sure the same number of children are there when she comes back, okay? So, all right. So that's the way you can help speak people's love language. It's not just making money, putting it in the bank, and look, I said I love you back when we got married, and I'll let you know if that changes, okay? So these poems are important. So we're going to see how it starts with Psalm 1. So we're going to read Psalm 1 to begin, okay? Psalms are kind of in the middle, all right? P-S-A-L-M is the psalm. Psalm 1 at the beginning of the collection. And you can look it up at the beginning of your Bible. There's an index if you need to find the page number. We're going to look at the first one today. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation. It should be up on your screen if you want to follow there. Either way, okay? Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with sinners, or join in with mockers. But they delight in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night. They are like trees planted along the riverbank, bearing fruit each season. Their leaves never wither, and they prosper in all they do. But not the wicked. They are like worthless chaff scattered by the wind. They will be condemned at the time of judgment. Sinners will have no place among the godly, for the Lord watches over the path of the godly, but the path of the wicked leads to destruction. Okay, so now in this psalm, we have a contrast being drawn between the wicked and the righteous. Our message today is to look at the way of the righteous. What is the way of the righteous? What are they like? How do they live? Okay? Now, as I said, this is a poem, and so this contrast is drawn in poetic forms. So we're going to see two statements, one about the righteous, one about the wicked, that are poetic, not literal. Okay? So, when it says the wicked are like chaff, that word like should be a clue. Okay? Like is a poetic indicator. All right, he's making a comparison. He's not saying they are chaff. Do you guys know what chaff is? No. All right. Well, this might be a good place to start to help. Okay, chaff. Okay, have you ever been driving through Indiana or Iowa and you see a harvester picking corn or soybeans, right? You got that much. All right, you know, it's a big green. If it's John Deere, it's a big green thing. It's got rotating blades on the front. Okay, what it does is it gathers up the plant with the fruit, the grain, and then separates it, and it puts the corn or beans in one bin. That's very simple, okay? And I don't think I can give it to you much more complicated than this. But it separates and puts the grain in one bin, and it kicks the chaff out the back. All right? All right? So if you are driving down a road and you see a combine harvester picking beans, and you see that cloud of junk coming out the back of the harvester, that's chaff. All right? Just goes out into onto the ground, out into the field, and then it gets worked back in as part of nature's way of recycling. Okay? But it's not worth, you don't want to eat chaff. They don't harvest chaff for a reason. Okay? You don't want to eat it. All right? And you don't want to actually get it on you. You get in, it's a mess. Okay? It's this fine, dry, powdery stuff. Okay? That's the residue once left from separating and getting what's valuable. Okay? The wicked are like that. They are not chaff, but they're like it. Okay? We'll say more about that. So in other words, we can't read this literally and say, well, those wicked people out there. Look across the street at Ball State. Wicked people at Ball State. Okay, you are chaff. All you're worth is to be kicked out the back of the harvester and walked under our boots. How do you think? What if that was our message? You people who are not like us, who are wicked, you're just waste on the ground that we're going to walk on. That's our message. What do you think? Is that a winning message? Good slogan? We'll put that on a banner, Emily, out front. You people are like chaff. Come to our church. Okay? I don't think that would work, Kyle. Do you? Okay. So, all right, here's how you know you're talking with poetry. Press it literally, and if you go, you know, that can't be right. God can't be saying that, right? Then you may be thinking, maybe this is not a literal statement. Maybe he's trying to say something poetically or in a comparison. And maybe we need to ask, why does he say it that way? What is God trying to say? Okay? Wicked people are not chaff, okay? But there's a quality about their life that's like it. So we'll talk more about that in just a moment. All right? So, he begins with this comparison between the righteous and the wicked, and he says, what are things? There are things that the righteous person will not do, and there are things that the righteous person will do. So we're going to look at the things that the righteous person will not do, or does not do, okay? Now, when I grew up in the church, and we talked about the wicked and the righteous in church life, okay? I don't know if very many of you have heard this kind of thing before, but when we talked about that, it was always discussed, righteous people don't do things like chew tobacco, or smoke, or drink alcohol, right? Or go to movies that are R-rated and use bad language. Or, we had a list of naughty things you're not supposed to do. How many of you have kind of grown up with that's what the understanding of the difference between the righteous and the wicked? Yeah, okay, right? I want you to notice, as you read Psalm 1, that is not the contrast that's made here. The psalmist does not make a list. Here are the naughty things that you righteous people, you're not supposed to do, okay? So, I remember there were people in my church. They were well-meaning, they were good people, but they got this wrong, okay? And a lot of people get this wrong, all right? But they didn't want us to play games that use cards and dice, because what do you do with cards and dice? You gamble, right? And gambling is a sin, right? And you can't, So that meant we couldn't play Monopoly, because it had cards in it, get out of jail free card, and it had dice that you rolled. It was a game of chance, right? So when you get into this literal thinking, and you say, well, we associate dice and cards with bad living, right? Okay? And so we don't want you to gamble, and we don't want you to play Monopoly, because you might get used to having those dice in your hand, right? And next thing you know, you'll be down at the horse track pulling the lever in Anderson, right? Okay? That's the way that kind of is. It's a very literal, flat way of thinking. Okay? Notice here, what does our author say about the difference between the righteous and the wicked? The righteous will not listen to the advice of the wicked, nor stand in the path of the sinner, or sit with the mocker. Okay. Now, as you read through the Psalms, you'll notice there's a poetic form that's a very Hebrew, Israelite poetic form called parallelism. Okay? So they stack and they'll layer statements that reinforce each other, or intensify each other, or they may just be restatements of the same meaning or theme. Okay? So essentially, these three statements are the same thing. Okay? That the advice of the wicked, counsel of the wicked, the path of the sinner, and sitting with the scoffer are all kind of the same thing. Okay? So really, and so the height of this, the intense, so you get to the third statement. The third statement is the scoffer or the mocker, depending on your translation. And you're dealing with this kind of person, right? The wicked, it's seen not in individual acts of disobedience, but in their mockery of God. Do they mock God? Do they scoff at God? That is the central. It's not a list of do's and don'ts. Now, it doesn't mean that in the Bible there aren't things you're told not to do or advised not to do. But the central premise is, do you fear God and respect Him, or do you mock God? Okay? How do you know you're in the presence of a scoffer? Okay? So our next slide. Okay? When you hear people who say things like this, all right? Don't be taken for a fool. Everyone does it. And then fill in the blank what it is, right? Have you ever heard? Everyone does that, right? Why would you not do this? Okay? Besides, those people who go to church, they're just hypocrites. On Sunday, they're singing songs and smiling at each other, but all through the week, they're nasty, horrible people doing bad things. They're just like us. Okay? Everyone does it. They're all hypocrites. No one will notice. If you go and do that little sin, okay, no one will notice. God's not looking. He's not watching. Okay? Matter of fact, God doesn't really, you don't believe in that myth about the sky God who lives up in the clouds. Right? He's not watching. That's just a tool of the powerful to get you plebeian people just to do what they want. Right? You don't believe that, do you? They'll say things like, that is old, that's out of date, we know better. Who's going to live by those old rules from Leviticus anyway? Right? Have you ever heard that? Okay? No one really believes those stories. We know better. Do you really believe in a God who lives in... Okay, now I can make a longer list, but when you hear those kinds of statements, we're in the presence of mockery. Now here's the scary part. I have heard those statements, every one of those, from Christians in the church, sometimes from church leaders. Okay? These are people who don't really fear God. They don't listen to Him. So when you hear this kind of stuff, be warned. Red flag. I'm in the presence. Okay, it's not that they went to a movie in which a few bad words were said. Okay, they went to an R-rated movie. They are bad people. But when you hear them mocking God and righteous living, that's when you know you're in the presence of the ungodly or the wicked. Okay? Too often, I would say, I'm not saying that there aren't things we're not supposed to do that we should do, but too often we get horrified by certain things people do. They drank too much, they slept around with somebody, whatever, they gamble, okay? But it's the mockery. And so then, as long as the Christian person, the church-going guy, doesn't go off and cheat on his wife, but he mocks God, we're okay with that, I guess, right? I mean, I've seen that happen in church. You know, people who come to church, they put money in the offering plate, and they mock God behind the scenes in conversation, in their heart. Okay? All right, so what are they supposed to do? Next slide should do that. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I want you to notice how he describes the wicked. What is the wicked wants you to think that they're hip and trendy and with it, right? We get to do stuff you guys don't get to do. Okay, we're having all the fun. All right? That's what you want. They want you to think. But if you pay attention to the way their lives go, where do they end? I think this is a great description. They may start off walking. They may be standing for a while, but they end up sitting, going nowhere, in the mocker seat. Just watch the people who don't have fear for God, who mock God. They end up retreating rather than progressing through life. Okay. That's the perspective of Psalm 1. All right, next. The next slide. What do the righteous do? Verse 2, Psalm 1. They delight in the law of the Lord, and they meditate on it day and night. I want to say something about the law of the Lord. For a long time, I had trouble with this psalm, because when I saw the word delight in the law, who delights in the rules? Okay? Everybody has rules, right? Have rules in the residence hall. Your parents had rules at home. The country has rules about how you're supposed to drive. Okay? We have rules about paying taxes, about all kinds of things. Who delights in that? Right? So part of our problem is we read this psalm, we hear it, and we hear the word law. And what do we think? We think Leviticus. We think a big, thick book, hundreds of pages with law codes that nobody, not only can they not even keep them, they can't even know them. You can't even keep track of all the rules you're supposed to keep. Right? Now, the devil wants us to think of this word law here in that mind. Okay? Rules that you're supposed to be keeping. Okay? And rules that the man, is that Pike? The man wants to keep you under his thumb from having a good time. He knows better, and he's got all the fun and the power and the money, but he's keeping you, lowly person sitting in this chair from having any of the fun. So as long as you keep the rules, he can have fun. That's the man doing that to you. Got you under his thumb, right? Okay? But that's not what the word means here. The word here is Torah. T-O-R-A-H. Torah. Some of you may have heard of the 5 books of the Torah, or the 5 books of the law. Those are the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. 5 books of Torah. Now, if you've ever read those books, how much of those are rules? I would say, at best, maybe half is rules. Now, you can find some list of rules in Leviticus and Numbers and Exodus particularly. You can find instructions about how to worship God and offer sacrifice in the temple and all those things, okay? Rules about your relationships with your wife and your neighbor and in the community, about stealing and hospitality to a stranger, all those things. There's lots of rules. But if you read particularly Genesis, what is most of Genesis about? Somebody who's in here who's read Genesis, parts of it, what is most of Genesis about? Derek Shipley, you cannot say. Anybody here want to take a venture, I guess? Be courageous. What's that, David? And it's told in stories. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. The biggest story is the story of Joseph. Now, how can that story of the life of Joseph be law? What does that mean? Okay, 5 books of law, 5 books of Torah. And most of it, really, probably well over half is stories about people. Okay? The main thing that Torah means is some version of either instruction or wisdom or word. Okay, what is it that God said? Okay, what is God's instructions for how to live? If you look at the life of Abraham, how does the story start? Abraham's minding his own business, okay, and God comes to him and says, I want you to go to a new country. And Abraham says, okay, I will. He doesn't get a tour book. He doesn't have a map. He doesn't have a step-by-step. Here's what you're going to do. And when you're going to do it. It's, you're going to go with me. I have a place I want you to live. I want you to go with me. I'll show it to you. Leave your home country. Okay? What is the story of Abraham really about? It's a story of a man who learned to trust God. And his life of faithfulness is about trusting God and what God asked him to do. It's not about keeping rules. All right, now, I want you to think about it. If you had a friend, it can be either, you put in your mind, a friendship or a dating relationship, okay? If that relationship is defined by rules, let's say your best friend, all your best friend had a bunch of rules. Here's how you're going to quit. Here's when you can call me. And when we go do something together, here's how we do it. It's just a list of rules. How would you enjoy that friendship? Would you kind of think of it as odd that a friend wants to define your relationship by a bunch of rules to keep? Would it be odd? It's kind of strange. We know instinctively that's not the way friendship is. It's not really the heart of our relationships. Okay? Whether you're talking about a friend, family member, marriage, neighbor, okay? All right, I'm going to give you a good example. There's a church not too far from here. I don't want to say too much about this. There's a church not too far from here that across from their driveway, they have a chain. No parking here. Across their driveway. That's a rule. They're defining everybody who drives past that church with a rule. We don't want you parking here during the week. Don't come in this parking lot. Okay? Now, I think I know what their concern is. They've had problems with semis coming in and tearing up their driveway and their parking lot. But what is the unintended result of that sign? You're not welcome. You're not welcome to come to this church during the week and pull into our parking lot, knock on the door. Can I talk to somebody? I need somebody to pray with me. No, you ain't going to find that here. So we got chain across our driveway. They're defining everybody by a rule. Okay? A law. Ultimately, our friendships, our family relationships, our working relationships, our marriages are all rooted in trust. Love and trust. Do we love each other and do we trust each other? Okay? If you don't trust your friends, what kind of friend should you have? Do you trust your dating, relationship, your neighbor? Okay. Now, in some cases, Molly, in the residence hall, you can't just have trust, right? You got to have a few rules in the residence hall. What if you had no rules in the residence hall? That would not be good. You've got to have some rules. Right? Or it'd be chaos. How many would you like to live in the residence halls and there are no rules? We're just going to trust everyone. Right? That wouldn't work. Okay? So, yeah, we do have to have some rules because we don't know everyone at a point where we can trust them. Right? I would hope my neighbors, I can trust them. I still lock my door for them. Okay? This is about knowing God, listening to His Word, hearing His instructions. When you think of the law in terms of God's wisdom and His Word, then you can delight in that. It's not the same as delighting in the rules, okay, and those kinds of instructions. But it's learning to delight in the Lord because He gives us wisdom and instructions for how to live our life. Okay? So we delight in them and we meditate on them. Now, some of you have heard me say this before. You've been in my office and we've had conversation. And I've said, have you read your Bible? Okay? Now, the best way to delight in the word of the Lord, and the law of the Lord, is to read your Bible and reflect on it and think about it. And sometimes you're going to read a passage and you're going to go, I don't understand this. Why? Why does God say this? That's okay. God wants you to chew on that and think about it. Maybe ask somebody who's thought about it. You can learn from them. That's all right. That's a form of learning to trust God when you say to God, I don't understand why you told me to do this or why you said it this way. I'm going to think about it and pray about it. I want you to reveal that to me. Okay? So, we have to meditate on it. We have to think on it. We have to let it sit. All right? And sometimes you have to read it again. Sometimes it's 4 or 5 years later. I read it. Oh, now I know what God means by that. Okay? So sometimes we read it one time and go, I don't know what that means. No, you have to meditate. You have to delight in it. Okay? So, that story I told you at the beginning of this message about the wife whose husband was gone for 8 weeks. Do you think she treasured those letters? The Bible tells us that Mary treasured the stories about Jesus' childhood in her heart. Now, I don't know that Jesus, when he was 2 years old, wrote his mom any letters. But she remembered things he said and did as a child, and they become letters that reside in her heart. Do you think any mom has those stories that they reflect, and sometimes they bring them out at family gatherings and tell them on us? Yes, my mom still does. I'm almost 60. My mom still tells stories, and anyway. So Sometimes there's stories I don't mind being told. Sometimes Mom, you don't need to tell that story again. Okay? We treasure those. Do we treasure laws? Or do we treasure the story? When we read the Bible, we should be treasuring this word because it's from God who loves us. He wants what's best for us. And so we delight in it, and we treasure it, and we meditate on it. Okay? So, you can look at the Bible as a book of law codes, and I have to read this to know what to do and what not to do. Or you can think of it as wisdom from God spoken through his prophets and teachers so that he can communicate his heart and his desire to know, so I know how to live. So I can know God better. That's delighting in these instructions and in these words. Okay? That's what Psalm 1:2 means. I want to turn over to Proverbs. Proverbs 1. The first 7 verses gives us a feel for that. These are the Proverbs of Solomon, David's son, king of Israel. Their purpose is to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise. Their purpose is to teach people to live disciplined and successful lives. To help them do what is right, just, and fair. These proverbs will give insight to the simple, knowledge and discernment to the young. Let the wise listen to these proverbs and become even wiser. Let those with understanding receive guidance by exploring the meaning in these proverbs and parables, the words of the wise and their riddles. Fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Have you ever known somebody, a friend, a family member, acquaintance, who thinks they know everything? And they don't listen to anyone, let alone God? Even if it was God, they wouldn't listen. Yeah. That's the kind of person he's talking about here, is the fool who does not listen to this. But the wise, those who accept with instruction are the wise. Because what do they recognize? I don't know it all. I need to learn. I want to hear from God what he has to say. That's what the Psalms are about. Okay? So the Psalms are poems given to us so that we can have life. All right. Verse 3 gives us a description of the righteous. The righteous is like. See, there's that word again. Like what? A tree planted near water. Okay, does it say is a tree? You are a tree? No, you're like a tree. What is the like? A tree that has a good source of water, what's it make it possible for that tree to do? Bear fruit, provide shade through its leaves and branches, to resist drought and storms, provide shelter to animals and people. Okay? The picture here is health and thriving, bearing fruit, resisting opposition. What makes it possible for you to resist the onslaught of the mockers? Let's say all the people in your life, you don't know any people who are godly people. Everybody you know is a scoffer or a mocker. How are you going to hold up? You need to be planted near the stream so you have a good source of water in your life. And that is the word and instruction of the Lord. Okay? Now, it's better if you have multiple people in your life who share that same stance. Okay? But the picture here is someone like Mary, who's drawing deeply from the Word of God, is nourishing her life, and she's able to withstand the onslaughts, storms of life, the criticism of the scoffer and the mocker. It's not that there's not going to be any mockers in your life, or there's not going to be any storms. But do you have the strength and the vitality and the health to resist? Those people are going to be there, who criticize you, who mock God, who doubt. What's it going to make it possible for you to thrive? For you to have life? It's delight in the instructions of the Lord. That's what's going to sustain you. That's what this psalm is teaching us. Okay? All right, so they are like, you're not a tree. Sometimes people read this and they think of, you are a tree, and that means you can only stay in one place. I never move. I never change. I'm right here, got roots going way deep. That's not the image. You're like a tree that's healthy, even when you're moving, because you are delighting in the word of the Lord. What did God say to Abraham? I want you to go to a new place. So what made it possible for Abraham to thrive in that new place? It was his relationship with God. He heard the word of the Lord and he trusted the Lord. That's what made it possible. All of you have left home and come to this strange place called Ball State University. What's going to enable you to thrive here? I would say it's delighting in the instructions of the Lord. You need to do that daily. Okay. Be like that tree that has a good source of water and soil nourishing its roots. Okay. All right. Good there. I laid my glasses down. All right, next. So you have this picture of the righteous, thriving, healthy, bearing fruit, but not the wicked. Verse 4. What are the wicked like? We talked about this already. They are like chaff. The stuff that kicks out the back of the car, that's what they're like. Because they are not the grain. In other words, they haven't been nourished by the eternal, life-giving word, the same word that brought the world into existence and created us, gives us wisdom for us to live by. And if we're rejecting that source, it'd be like a tree saying, I don't want water, pull up its roots. That's kind of ludicrous, isn't it? It's kind of absurd to think about a tree doing that. Why would it? We're not like trees. We can do that. We can say, I don't want good things. I don't want eternal things. I want to rebel against God. You can do that. We have that choice. We have that ability. And that's what happens. We become like, our life dries up. We go from moving to sitting, to standing, to sitting in our mockery, and life dries up. Have you ever seen someone who after a period of time, they don't have hope, they don't have life, they've spent their life mocking God, mocking good things, and they get to a period of time when they're just dry and lifeless, hopeless. And what do they need? They need a fresh blowing of God's Spirit and Word in their life. That's what the ungodly are, the wicked are like, worthless chaff. They will be condemned, not because they went to R-rated movies or played with Monopoly using dice. They will be condemned because they have rejected God, the Lord, who has spoken good words to them. They have chosen not to listen to him. So that is the failed life of the wicked in verses 4 and 5. Verse 6, though, says, what is the fate of the righteous? The fate of the righteous, you're going to have big houses, lots of money, right? Nice cars, good jobs, live in the best place. Is that what's in there? You might read verse 6. What's it say? What is the fate? What is the fate of the righteous? It's that God knows them. They're in in a trusting relationship with God the Father. The life-giving presence of the universe knows us and loves us. Now, the mocker, the scoffer says, oh yeah, give me the money. Right? Church and listening to God, big salary. Isn't that the way it's often portrayed? Or whatever, fill in the blank. Fun, pleasure. I want that stuff. But you want me to listen to God? That's the key to happiness? Listening to God and His Word? Yes. And it might mean not having much money. Okay? Or living within the means of what you do have. Maybe you're learning to say, I've got enough. I've got enough. I don't need, can I live on $80,000 a year? Do I have to have $200,000 a year? What, maybe it's $40,000. I don't know what you're going to have. But can I live on that? Can I learn to live on it? Can I trust God for that? Or am I going to lust after more? I want more money, more fame, more pleasure. This is not enough. What God has given me is not enough. Okay? The fate of the righteous is, they say, what's the most important thing in my life? It's delighting in hearing from the Lord. That is the most important thing. And the Bible says here, when you delight in hearing from the word of the Lord, you will prosper. Your life will be healthy. You'll be like that tree. You'll prosper. Okay. All right. Habakkuk 2:4. I want to close with this. Should be up here. Right there, in the middle. Okay? Lord watches over the path of God, but the path of the wicked leads to destruction. God watches. He knows the path of the godly. Habakkuk 2:4 says, look at the proud. They trust in themselves, and their lives are crooked. But the righteous will live by their faithfulness to God. Paul quotes that in Romans 1:17. The righteous will live by faith. That's part of the gospel. And I think sometimes our translations don't give us the best way of phrasing this. I want to encourage you to think of where it says the righteous. In the middle of Habakkuk 2:4 it says the righteous. You should think about the righteous one. The righteous person. And I want you to ask this question. Who is the righteous one? Who is the righteous person that lives by faith? Paul, several times in Romans and Galatians, holds Abraham up as an example of faith. Abraham lived by faith. What does that mean? It means he trusted God. Who is the person that the New Testament says trusted God the most fully, most completely? Who is the righteous one of Psalm 1? I believe Psalm 1 is preparing us to think about Jesus as the righteous one. He is the one who delights in the law of the Lord, who meditates on it day and night. And he leads us and calls us into that relationship with God so that we too can learn from him how to delight in God. Jesus is the Son who delights in the word of his Father. In Mark chapter 1, verse 9 through 11, it's the story of Jesus coming to the wilderness outside of Jerusalem, meets John the Baptist, he gets baptized. And a voice comes and said, "This is my son. This is my beloved son. Listen to him." There's this relationship between Jesus and God of intimacy and trust and faith and obedience that I can only aspire to. I can only hope for or long for in my life. Jesus has it. And Jesus sacrificed that life death on the cross so you and I can live and know God. And then God exalted him, raised him from the grave, called him to himself to affirm the life of obedience of his Son. So we have this picture of the righteous Son, the obedient Son who loves his Father. In Mark chapter 6, I just chose this one out of, there's one among many. There's a place Jesus has been teaching the crowds. They feeds the 5,000. Busy, busy day. Lots of people. You ever have those days where you go, will this day ever end? Right? Tired, busy, busy. So what does Jesus say? Okay, I'm going to send you guys off. I need some time to pray. He goes up on a hill and he spends some time with God in prayer. Now, sometimes, when you think literally, kind of flat, wooden, literal, Jesus was God in the flesh. Why would he need to pray? Right? He already knows God. Every minute. It's like God walking around, like a robot. Okay? That's not the way it was. He was fully human. But the unity between Jesus and God was so real and vital that Jesus wanted to spend time with the Father. And he took time away from the crowds and his work, and he would go away to pray. When you read through the Gospels, read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, you'll see every now and then little moments where Jesus says, okay guys, break, time out, I need to spend. He'll spend the night praying, reading Scripture, listening to God, enjoying time with the Father, delighting in the Torah. I think that's what Jesus was doing. Now, Jesus needed that and wanted it and craved it. What about us? Do we? Do we follow Jesus in desiring to hear a word from the Lord? So I just want to challenge you to think about Psalm 1 as a guide for our knowing the Lord, to delight in the instructions from the Lord, to meditate upon them day and night, and to recognize that Jesus is the one who models what it means to be righteous. He not just in not sinning and doing the right things, keeping rules, it's not what it means, but he models that relationship of trust and faith in God, and offers us a path for us to follow him in developing that relationship through faith in him. That's what Jesus asks us to do. That's what Jesus represents. That faithful Son who invites you and I to be God's children, part of his family, and to know that peace that comes from listening to the word. Psalm 1. Delight in the law of the Lord. I think, if I remember right, we're going to have communion now. This is true. And I forgot to look and see who's supposed to come. Olivia Stiver is going to come prepare us. So, you may have at it.